Story 4. By no means it's chronically haunted. I myself was a skeptic before working here, although I'll leave my experience for the end. A bit of history before I start talking about the ghosts. I want to remain somewhat anonymous, but you'll probably figure out the castle I work at. It was built in the 13th century. It's been through 5 sieges. Features a dungeon in the southwestern tower with a jailer's folly on the staircase down to it and an oubliette. There is also an oubliette in the northwestern tower, which is the castle's most defensible tower. It was used to hold silver coins in the early centuries, then as a powder room for the cannons. There are also a number of burial pits from the sieges. When the courtyard of the castle was dug up during the 1990s, the number of bodies found was in the hundreds. They were unable to exhume all of them, therefore some of those bodies are still there today. The castle remained an English military base in the region from its construction until the early 20th century. At that point, it was converted into social housing, with about 24 families living on the grounds. The 17th century saw the castle's bloodiest history, with 3 sieges during this time. The first siege saw town civilians forced into the castle to be able to survive the attacks. This put a strain on the castle's provisions, which led to both soldiers as well as civilians literally starving to death within the walls. There were also outbreaks of dysentery, a condition brought on by starvation. It's also known as the bloody flux. If you know what that is, it's horrible why to suffer. The second siege had the besiegers of the city refuse to parley women and children, forcing them back into the city. Anyone caught trying to escape the siege by the invading soldiers were beheaded, with their heads placed on spikes outside of the city gates. In the last 2 months of this battle, there was an outbreak of the Black Plague, which affected both sides. The invading forces were throwing the dead plague victims over the city walls, to increasing the plague count among the defenders and civilians. Now to the ghost of the castle. There are lots of reports from employees, former residents and barracks members of seeing starving apparitions walking the towers or appearing in the windows. One in particular is of a man who appears in the archer's nest on the northwestern tower, before walking through a now walled-up, since 1970s corridor toward the tower's oubliette. Within that staircase, there are also reports of hurried footsteps following you up and down the stairwell. I've had 2 security guards report this since I've worked here, and most recently an electrician whose first time on site was last week. There's also a spirit in this tower who takes a particular dislike to Scottish people, which is pretty funny. They don't like Scottish guests, as well as our Glasgow security guard. It really didn't like the Scottish ghost hunting TV program crew members who were in last year. In the southern tower, there are disembodied screams, cries, and weeping that come up from the stairwell to the dungeon. This stairwell is always closed to general public, as it features a jailer's folly, which is about a meter drop in the middle of a winding staircase before continuing. The point is that if you have a particularly rowdy prisoner, you give him some motivation to go downstairs. The dungeon also periodically floods depending on the river's tide. I've been down there on a low tide, and it has a very oppressive atmosphere. The castle gatehouse has a few spirits. One is called the Big Fellow, which can be seen walking through the top 2 rooms pacing back and forth. There is also video evidence of this guy on that same Scottish Ghost Hunters program. Another is called Monty, who can be heard jangling keys while making his rounds. There's also the Smoking Man, which is said to be the officer of the barracks during the 19th century, who would sit under the arch of the gate and have his morning smoke. He suffered an aneurysm and died standing in that spot. Many employers have reported smoke coming from this archway, along with the smell of tobacco. On misty mornings from across the courtyard, people have reported an amber glow in the gateway. On the top of the gate houses one of the rooms, which can only be accessed from the opposite tower. Guards making their rounds would always find this door ajar in the mornings. Now there's the strange wooden doors of the castle. When closing it, you must walk in a counterclockwise direction to close each door with a latch behind you as you go. Every morning you open the door clockwise, opening each latch and door successively till you reach the last door. I've had multiple occasions closing the doors in the evening, while being the first one to open the next day. Every door would be wide open, as if I never closed it the next before. The saddest of our named spirits is the Black Lady, resides in the northeastern tower, which was a 17th century armory. When the Confederates stormed the castle in the first siege, they found a civilian woman hiding there. They would do horrible things to the woman before murdering her. There is a patch of damp in the room right against the wall, which has stone masons from the multiple repair reports in 1753, 1991, 2013, and 2023, all fail to find a reason for this occurrence. The local legend goes, if you hear singing in the room, good fortune will befall on you. But if you hear weeping, it's a bad luck would be placed on you. There were also the skeletal remains of a pregnant woman found just outside the entrance of this tower when the courtyard was dug up in the 90s. Finally, my experience happened in the undercroft of the castle. The eastern wall is no longer there, but instead, there is a modern building preserving the archaeology underground. Which, when touring the museum, you enter the castle grounds by walking underneath this building in the low light before emerging up into the courtyard. I work as historical preformed and guide within the courtyard, which is why I open and close the towers. As well as getting to explore parts of the castle the general public does not have access to. It was about 8:30 in the morning in July. I had just turned on the AC in the museum and started making my way outside. I went down through the undercroft to the courtyard, walking perpendicular through the remains of what was a corridor in the eastern wall, when a gust of wind rushed through me coming from my right side. When my hair stood up, I swear I heard the exhale of breath. As I turned and looked around, I saw through the darkness of the tombs, but saw nothing. Then I looked to the left through this corridor. When the southern wall used to be, this dark, wispy figure was moving down that direction. I could see the figure move as it blocked the light from the lamps in the corridor, before it rounded a corner of the elevator and moved down into a siege tunnel. My immediate reaction was to laugh. After that, I refused to go down there for 2 weeks. When we lock up for the night, you must take the elevator down close, both entrance doors, turn off the lights, while using a torch to find the elevator to go back up into the modern building above. I have never had a paranormal experience before or since that day. Story 2 by Dream Drought. Ever since I was young, probably about 5 or 6, as of writing this I'm 17, I've had sleep paralysis, experiencing it about 1 to 2 times a month. I experienced the usual feeling terrified, not being able to move despite using all my strength. Sometimes my eyes are open, sometimes they're closed. But that's not the main point. Every time I get out of one, I see a goat man at the end of my bed, squatting, facing away from me. Every time I see him, strangely enough, I don't feel scared. Hell, I feel at ease, I feel protected. He stays there until I fall back asleep, not moving. I can see him breathing, but that's the most he moves. I have seen his full body, well, at least half of it before, and a few times during the day when I'm home alone. I was home alone, waiting for my cousin and uncle to come get me, and my family was out shopping. I heard a loud crash, as if a box with stuff fell over, so my first thought was to grab my knife and investigate. I cleared my little sister's room, hallway, kitchen, and living room. As I walk into the main bathroom, I saw him in my parents' bathroom. My bathroom, the room with the shower, and my parents' bathroom is connected, but separated by doors, if that makes sense. He has a dark gray head, red eyes, human torso, kind of built. I could barely see what I would assume to be a goat's lower half. He was a bit taller than me. I'm 5'4", so he was about 5'6" or around that if my memory serves me right. Although I've had good experiences with him, my instincts took over, and I booked it to my room, stupid since my knife was out, but thankfully, I didn't fall. Once I realized what just happened, I went back to my parents' bathroom to see if he was there, and he wasn't. I still see him, and even gave him a name, Baal, after the Mesopotamian god of fertility and harvest. It's depicted as a goat man cradling an infant, if I did my research right. Story 2 by Dream Drought. My most frightening experience was when I was about, I want to say around 11-12 years old, to set the scene. At the time, my little sister and I shared a room. We lived with our parents in a 2-bedroom apartment, Our room was the bigger of the two, and my parents were in a room next door, and our room was at the end of a long hallway. As soon as you opened our bedroom door, the first thing you see is my bed against the back wall, and upon turning immediately to your right, my sister's bed was against the corner on the opposite wall. Our mom was an RN, and she worked graveyard at the local hospital, and Dad worked super early in the morning as an electrician. So he was well asleep, snoring like a fucking freight train in their bedroom. It was a few minutes after 3 a.m., and I was in that state of being sort of on the brink of sleep, but still relatively awake. Everyone in the house is sleeping. Mom is not home. Suddenly, the light turns on in the hallway. I'm lying on my side, facing the wall. I hear the bedroom door open, and I can see the sliver of light getting wider. No shadow whatsoever. A voice calls my first name in a really gruff whisper. Then it says it again, a little bit louder. And by then, I'm wide awake and absolutely terrified. Then, the whisper gets really loud and super close to my ear before the door slams shut and the hallway light bulb goes out. I didn't sleep for almost a full 48 hours, and I couldn't sleep without a light on for the next year and a half. To this day, it's been the scariest experience I've ever had. It still gives me the chills, remembering it now. Story 4 by Hi. I work overnight in a funeral home. My shift starts at 7 p.m. and ends at 6 a.m. We've had some creepy things happen which I love. I wanted to share it all with somebody but didn't know who. Here are a few of my experiences. This one happens quite often. Outside of the prep room, the place in the funeral home where we embalm bodies, we will hear footsteps pacing the hallway. At any given point, there are no more than 4 people in the building on a normal night, so for 2 people to be in the prep room and hear this while everybody else is out on their first calls, I would rule out the footsteps belonging to anybody. This one also happens, maybe 2-3 times a week. The door in my office will slam shut. The other day, for example, I walked through the office door after getting a drink from our break room. As I went to our dressing area, the door literally slammed shut behind me. It also happens when I'm at my desk and totally alone in the funeral home. The hallway outside my office with the door that slams shut, I can also hear footsteps pacing back and forth. I tend to just close my office door when I'm working, so I don't have to hear it all. So back to the prep room. One night I was chatting with 2 other co-workers outside the prep room. We had just finished embalming some people and were taking a small break before cleaning up to disinfecting, sterilizing everything. We are all standing around outside the door and hear something hit the far wall of the prep room, then hit the ground. As I went to investigate, it turns out it be the trocar button tool, but the last person to use it sat the tool down on his prep table in front of everyone, about 30 feet away from the wall that it hit before dropping to the ground. Another thing in the prep room that I didn't personally experience, but my coworker on the other shift swears by this. He was prepping somebody while he was alone in the building when the phone on the wall started dialing out. The phone dialed a funeral home in Missouri, the same funeral home that the person on the prep table was going to be shipped to. Last one. This happened last night, actually. We have industrial yellow cabinets that hold the flammable fluids. On top of these cabinets are plastic bins that we will put babies in before going in the cooler. That way they can be more protected. Anyways, all of our bins fell off the top of the cabinet. There were 3 of us in the building. I was coming around the corner when I saw it. 1 person was in the prep room, and the closest person to the cabinet was easily over 30 feet away.